All right, welcome back. Let's go in and take a look excuse me, at that third question. All right, so we've dealt with when he's talking about, and the disciples are asking him about his coming, that it's not what's often taught about his second coming down the road. They're talking about him coming into his kingdom. He's the king. What's the sign Jerusalem's going to be destroyed? What's the sign that you're reigning? You're the Messiah. You're supposed to be the king. And so Jesus is giving them all the signs leading up to the fall of Jerusalem, and starts beginning to talk about his ascension to the right hand of the Father. He quotes from Daniel, which is the most important passage for that. Daniel sees the one like the Son of Man coming to the throne room of the Ancient of Days. And so Jesus is using specifically that Old Testament terminology of coming with the clouds of heaven, because that's what Daniel used when he was talking about the Messiah coming into the throne room of the Ancient of Days and receiving his kingdom and reigning from the throne room of heaven, right? So Jesus closes that part by saying all these things must happen in that generation. But there is still a third question. And the third question is, what about the end of the age? So that's more what most of us would think, or I mean, not anymore now you've seen these videos, but prior to seeing some of this, or just the common teaching that's kind of out there for a lot of people, is the end of everything, right? And so this is the one question that deals with that, the final day. When is this all wrapped up? When is the Lord return? What about resurrection? What about final judgment? What about the very end, right? So, so that I believe the answer. So verse 34, Matthew 24:34. We can read that real quick. He says, "Assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place." Right? So those first two things, the fall of Jerusalem and Jesus going to the throne room of heaven to reign over his kingdom from the throne room of heaven, he said that's going to take place in this generation. Now he's going to start answering the third question. So those first two, that's wrapped up and done. He's explained it. He said all that's going to happen in this. Now let's go to the third question. It begins in verse 35. "Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away." Now, most of your Bibles then are going to have a new section between 35 and 36. And what does that do mentally? It tells you, okay, there's two separate things here. And it also makes it seem like 35 is just the wrap up to the stuff that he's already been saying. So these sections, they're not in the original. They're not, I don't even think you could say they're necessarily divinely inspired. These are just things that people have put in along the way just to break it up and make it a little easier for people to read and kind of understand what's going on. But they're not always right about these things. I mean, some of these things where they put in these sections, it's actually better if you just read it all the way through. It kind of gives a false breakup in the text that's not actually there. It kind of puts some made up divisions into thoughts that really, there shouldn't have been a division there. Maybe it was all together. I mean, there's some parts where Jesus' sermons are broken up into like 8 pieces, whereas that was all one big thought. And you kind of lose a little bit when you take them piece at a time, because you forget, oh wait, 2 pages ago, he said this, and that was all still the same conversation, right? You know, and so anyways, this is one of those instances where I think the division they put in there is not helpful. All right, let's look at verse 36. "But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, but my Father only." Right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to put verse 35 and 36 together, right? And I believe that is his answer to the third question. The third question is about the end of everything. When is heaven and earth going to pass away? Right? What is the end of the age? When you know, that's heaven and earth passing away. That's Old Testament terminology for the end of everything, and God's going to start over with something new. Right? So this current creation is limited, right? Because we've fallen into sin. God is going to start over new, and it's going to be different. And so heaven and earth are going to fall away. They're going to be washed, and he's going to start over with something new. And those who are his people, right, that have put their trust in him and walked in his ways, that's his people are going to be the ones that get to start over with him, right? Everyone else will fall into judgment. And so that's what they're asking. Asking about the end of everything. So let's look at verse 35. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. So they're saying, when is everything going to pass away? When is the end of it all? Jesus says, heaven and earth will pass away. My words will not pass away. So in other words, you're right. I am going to start over. But what I've declared for my words, that carries on. So just so that we're clear, the truth of God doesn't have an ending. It doesn't have a stop. Well, everything that he's saying, it doesn't start over first. But the heaven and the earth, the physical side of things, that will pass away. You're right. That's what he's telling them. Heaven and earth will pass away. My words will not. But of that day and hour, nobody knows. Not even the angels, not even the Son. Only the Father knows. Right? So what is Jesus saying? They're asking about the end of everything. He said, heaven and earth are going to pass away. He said, but of that day and hour, when that's going to happen, I don't know. No one knows. The angels in heaven don't know. Only the Father knows when the last day will be. So notice that great division. When he's talking about things that are about to happen, the fall of Jerusalem and him going to the right hand of the Father to reign in his kingdom, he gives lots of details. He says, you should know. What does he say? He said, verse 32, learn the parable from the fig tree. When its branches have already become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So when you see these things, know that it's near at the doors. He's saying the fall of Jerusalem and him being at the right hand of the Father, you should be able to know when that happens. He said there's going to be all kinds of signs. You should know exactly when that's going to happen. When Jerusalem's surrounded by the army of Rome, you should know, hey, when you see that, it's about to happen, right? He said there will be signs for all of those parts. He said it will be obvious to you. But then notice the stark contrast when he starts talking about the very last day. He said, now, heaven and earth is going to pass away. But when that happens, the day and the hour, nobody knows. I don't even know. I can't give you anything about that because I don't know when it's going to happen. Only the Father knows that, right? He says, the only thing I can tell you is this. He says, as the days of Noah were, so also will be the coming of the Son of Man. In the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark. And they did not know until the flood came, and it took them all away. So also will be the coming of the Son of Man. So what he's saying is it's going to be like the days of Noah. It caught everyone off guard. That's the whole point of what he's saying. Is nobody knew the flood was coming until it came. And he said that's how it's going to be with the very last day. Nobody's going to know it's coming until it comes. I don't know. The angels in heaven don't know. Only the Father knows. So I can't give you signs. I can't tell you what it's going to be like. All I can tell you is it's going to be unexpected because nobody knows. He's the only one that knows. So it will catch everyone off guard. Now, a couple of things. Let me lay some foundation with this. One thing that's important, sometimes I've seen many times, particularly lately, whole books have been written about it, where it says that as the days of Noah, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. And so, they're talking about it's going to be a return to the evil and the condition, if you will, of how it was before the flood, with giants or Nephilim and evil all over the world and all this kind of stuff. And they make it as if what Jesus is saying is before the very end, the world's going to return back to the evil that they had right before the flood. But that's not what he's talking about at all. He's not talking about what the condition of the world is going to be like. All he's trying to do is make the point that in the same way that the flood caught everyone off guard, so will be the last day. It's going to catch everyone off guard. There's not going to be a sign leading up to it. It's going to catch everyone off guard. Now, this is huge. Huge. Get this one in your mind. This is huge. He says that last day when heaven and earth is rolled up, there's not going to be a sign. It's going to catch everyone off guard because he doesn't know. The angels don't know. No one knows where that day is. It's going to catch everyone off guard. So, this is where the rubber meets the road. This is why I say it's so huge. Almost every end times book that has been produced in the last 200 years goes contrary to what Jesus taught. They are trying to show signs of the end. They're trying to find out signs of the end, and they're using the Bible to teach all these signs of the end. And Jesus himself said, there's not going to be any. I don't know. That day and that hour, I don't know. All I can tell you is it's going to catch everyone off guard because nobody knows when it's coming. And so what they're doing with most of this stuff is taking his signs, which were about things that had to happen in that first century, about the fall of Jerusalem and him going to heaven to the right hand of the Father. All those things are going to have signs. And the church in the last 200 years has taken that whole discussion about the fall of Jerusalem and the ascension of Christ and made that the signs of his second coming, right? And it's just totally backwards. Those were signs of the fall of Jerusalem and Jesus going to the right hand of the Father. When he gets ready to talk about the last day, he said, there is no sign. I don't know. How can I give you a sign? I don't know when it is myself. And so much teaching on the end times is trying to figure out the signs of the Lord's return, or the signs that we're at the end, or the signs that everything's about to come to pass. And Jesus is saying, there's not one. So, he goes on then, for the rest of 24 and 25, to tell 5 to 6 stories, parables, that illustrate the point that when he comes, nobody's going to know. He's going to catch everyone off guard. So the parable of the foolish virgins, where you got 5 were ready and 5 weren't. He says, you got to be ready. He said, there's going to be, he tells the story of the servants. They think, oh, he's taken a long time for him to come back. And so they weren't prepared. And it caught them off guard. The whole point of it, I don't think he's saying at all that the world's going to go back to the evil before the flood, because those would be signs. He said, well, when you see that, know your time is near. What he's saying is that in the same way the flood took everyone off guard, because no one was expecting it. They were eating, drinking, giving in marriage. They had no idea it was their last day. He said, that's how it's going to be here. Because I don't even know the last day. How could anyone not be taken off guard if nobody knows when it is? He says it's going to be like that. In the same way that no one on earth knew the flood was going to come that day, no one on earth is going to know that the Lord is going to return on whatever day he chooses to return. And so Jesus then in Matthew, the end of 24 and all of 25 is just one story after another about how unexpected his return is going to be. How there were no signs for it. It caught everyone off guard. There was nothing you could do to expect that it was going to come. All you can do is just be ready. In your own walk with God, stay ready. Walk with him. Don't try and time it to the end. Just walk with him. Develop a relationship with him, because you are not going to know when it's close. It's going to be like the flood. Nobody knew it was close. And he's saying you're not going to know when it was close. And most end times teaching just gives no credence to that, and just goes on about trying to predict and show all these signs of the times. And I think every bit of it is wrong. I think every bit of it is off. Almost 90-something% of the signs that they're pointing to are signs that were for the fall of Jerusalem. Now, to say that there are no signs of the end does not mean that there are not a few things mentioned that have to happen still. There's some unfulfilled prophecies that have to happen, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't give you any clue as to whether those things are close to the end or not. So, for example, Paul says that Israel will be grafted back in. Now, they're going to fall away for a long time, and it's going to be all about the season of the Gentiles. But there's going to be a time that Israel has this great revival. And as a nation, in general, they come back to the Lord. Doesn't mean every single person. I mean, there's going to be unbelievers and everywhere. But in general, the nation of Israel is going to return back to the Lord, and they will be grafted back in. And it's going to be an awesome season. But that does not mean that that's a sign that the end is imminent. So Jesus says there are no signs that the end is imminent. There are no signs that you're almost there. Those were for the fall of Jerusalem. Now, there are some prophecies that will take place and that have not taken place yet. But there is no anchor point connecting how close the revival of Israel is with the last day. Nobody knows. It could be 1,000 years after that. Nobody knows. And so just because there are some things that still have to happen, there's a prophecy in there where he says, before the end of everything, the ages of people will become like trees again. So that someone who dies at the age of 100 will be considered accursed. Right? So that can't be in the new heaven and the new earth where we have eternal bodies, because people aren't dying then. That's before that final day, before heaven and earth are wrapped up and there's that final day. There will be a season on the earth where, and it doesn't say just believers, where everyone on the earth is living longer again. Probably some kind of medical breakthroughs and technology and enhancements in those areas, and people are going to start living longer again, he says, like the ages of trees again. But so that is a prophecy that still has to take place. But just because that takes place, there's nothing in there that says that takes place immediately right before the end of the Lord. So he's saying there may be some prophecies that are going to have to be fulfilled, but none of those are chronologically in any way connected to the end, because nobody knows when the end is. And so you just have to be ready. And so when you read through the parable of the talents, man goes away for a long time, comes back, wants to know, did you steward well what I gave you? The parable of the foolish virgins, he goes away for a long time, longer than they thought, comes back. Some of them had no oil, some of them did. You have to be ready, right? And that leads me into a thought that we'll pick up. It's going to be a whole new section. So this kind of is our wrap up of what Jesus taught, right? For this particular section. And I want to go into something else in the next video about the millennium and the difference between premillennial and postmillennial. Kind of show you where I stand on that. And so, because, Jesus is saying that nobody knows when the Lord is going to return. But you have lots of these prophecies between now and then. And he says, with this wise and foolish virgins, he says, when I come back, that's it. There are no other chances. When I come back, everything's over. There is no other chances. There's a lot of teaching out there that the Lord's going to come back, he's going to take the church, and then there's going to be this long period, and then after that, there's the final thing. And I want to debunk a little bit of that, at least how I see it, show you how I see it. Because I think everything that Jesus talks about is that there's only one day left when he's going to come back, and then that's it. And when he comes back, there's nothing left, right? When he comes back to judge and separate, there's going to be 5 that are doing right and 5 that aren't. The believers and the unbelievers are still on the earth at that point. Those who stewarded well and those who don't steward well are good. His servants that treated people right and his servants that didn't, they're all still on the earth at the same time when he comes back on that final day, right? And so I believe Jesus teaches one day at the end when he's going to return. But that's going to take a whole series on the difference between post-millennial thinking and premillennial thinking, and how to understand the millennium, how to understand this 1,000 years of peace, right? And I think this will be a good jumping off point, because when Jesus is teaching that final day, he says there are no signs. But the other thing he says is there's nothing left after that. There is no room for repentance. There is no years and years after the Lord comes back and separates people where you could get it right. When he comes back, the implication of every one of these parables is that's the last day. That's it. Either you're ready or you're not. And so we're going to take that piece and then apply it to how people understand the millennium in our next kind of big section. It'll probably take a few videos maybe to do that.